All right.
Oh shit! Really sorry.
Girl, you're a
My
mess.
computer came unplugged, and it won't read. Where do I go?
Girl.
Just fucking blame it on the edit.
Reading is fundamental. Reading is fundamental.
Hello, and welcome to the Reading is Fundamental podcast, or if you're checking this out on YouTube, our second episode.
This is the podcast where we talk about and break down legal issues in and related to the entertainment industry.
Why? Because we're attorneys.
And you're not.
Well, most likely you're not. We created this podcast with the intention of educating independent content creators who may not have access to legal services.
We welcome everyone, including attorneys, to listen in and learn more about topics in entertainment law. And if you're an entertainment attorney yourself, feel free to give us some feedback or say something in the comments.
As entertainers, we know that dealing with the legal issues can be a lot and detracts from the creative work that you want to do. But no worries, we're here to break it down for you and give you the good tea on how to navigate legal issues in your entertainment careers.
All of this will be done through the lens of our lives, our gayness, our sex positivity, our radical acceptance, and our love for Drag Race, which is why this is called Reading is Fundamental, because you need to read your damn contracts.
So what's new, Dextra?
Oh my gosh, we got to go to the finale taping of season 14 in Las Vegas last week. It was probably one of the best times of my entire life. My biggest takeaway is I loved seeing how the sausage was made. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Nothing was filmed in order of what we were. We had to do general applause kind of things. And anytime they just lifted the curtain, it was brand new. We had no idea what was going on. And that was honestly the best part for me.
There would be moments where the room got quiet or just all activity stopped. And then you'd hear Michelle explaining to us, okay, this is what's happening. This is going on backstage. We need to be quiet, or someone's going to be making an entrance. And it even got to the point where RuPaul came on stage and she was like, Michelle, you don't need to be explaining to them what's going on. They're just fucking happy to be here. It was a little condescending.
But I was happy to be there.
But we lived for it. We lived for it.
But I really was happy to be there. Michelle kind of hosted the whole thing and was, telling us what to do the whole time and where we needed to be. She was lovely and she looked amazing. Another one of the best parts about it is that we were in this theater and it was literally just a whole theater full of Drag Race super fans. So when we got to meet other people, it was what are your fan theories? What's going to go on? And as things were progressing, you're well, they showed us this, but they didn't show us this, and blah, 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 blah. So we were able to talk through all of what we loved about Drag Race with all of these other Drag Race fans.
Michelle, during the breaks, would do audience Q&A, and I got selected to ask for a question. Michelle called me a Depeche Mode leather daddy. I think my favorite part, both of our favorite parts was when they asked RuPaul whether she wanted to retake a certain part of the segment, and RuPaul's response was, and we've all known this, I want to do as little work as possible.
She literally said that. She's Mariah Carey level of just move me to this part of the stage, just move me here, that's it. I want to do as little work as possible. We signed no NDA. I was literally prepared to go in, read the entire NDA that they were going to give to us and soak it in. I didn't see no NDA.
Yeah, there was nothing. So the producers came out on stage and they were basically we know everyone likes to get on Reddit. Please be polite, fans. The rule said no phones, but if you brought them in there, you were fine as long as you didn't have them out during filming. And as we all know, they film each of the winners winning, so that part doesn't leak.
Yeah.
It was a really great experience, and now we hopefully know what the process is going to be for the season 15 finale taping. Speaking of season 15, let's get into our episode.
Let's see what the season 15 girls agreed to when they signed their contract.
In this episode, we'll be breaking down RuPaul's Drag Race season 15 contract.
We want to give a shout out to YouTuber Bussy Queen. About a year ago, Bussy did a breakdown of the Drag Race season 14 contract and inspired us to create our own content related to the entertainment industry.
You ain't got to reinvent the wheel.
You ain't got to reinvent the wheel. Bussy did a fabulous job parsing through the very dense verbiage of that contract. So our goal here is not to take anything away from them, but to add our own perspective as attorneys and to help explain some of the terms that non-attorneys might not be familiar with.
Wait a minute. Their name's Bussy Queen?
Yes.
They're not Bussy Queen?
I think it's Bussy.
So I've been calling them Bussy this whole time?
I think it's Bussy.
Okay.
I think.
Bussy it is?
You can find a link to Bussy Queen's channel below. Go and give them some love.
But before we get into the material at hand, we have a little legal disclaimer for you. Roll the credits. The information on this episode is for general information purposes only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as legal advice for any individual case or situation. This information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. Sorry about it.
Now, when we decided to make this video, I was a little worried. I know that putting this out there could maybe cause some commotion or ruffle a little feathers, and I don't want to be on the bad side of production for World of Wonder. I would definitely like the opportunity to be part of the show if possible. So despite my own feelings about the agreement, I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible and make sure that I'm objective when I'm explaining some of the terms in the contract.
And we're going to get into this more specifically later, but the confidentiality provisions of the agreement do permit us to speak and comment on the contract as it is provided to all the contestants. So the way that we decided to break down this contract for you is to think of it in terms of a fictional queen who gets cast. And basically break it down timeline-wise from the moment you receive the contract, from when you submit your video, if you get selected for pre-production, during production, the period after, what we'll talk about is being the exclusivity period, the other offer period, and then any options that may arise and any other notable things for you to digest.
So our fictional season 15 queen, it's December 2021. She's ready to apply for RuPaul's Drag Race. She's going to go online, fill out the little questionnaire for it, and then she's going to be directed to her email where she finds this participation agreement. The participation agreement is made available to the queens, but it must be reviewed and signed before you even get instructions to how to produce the casting tape. Yep, you heard that right. Even before you get instructions for the casting tape, you need to sign this agreement. And right at the top of the agreement, it says in capitalized letters, do not sign this agreement until you have read it completely. Now, Stefan, just right off the bat, how many people do you think read through all 37 pages of this before signing?
Well, I think the contestants are working on a pretty short timeline to submit their videos, so I think you kind of skim through the contract and start immediately working on what's required in the video, because I think there's, like 2 or 3 weeks that you have to do the video?
I think 4 maybe.
4 weeks, all right.
Yeah.
So if you have 4 weeks, you want to start working on the video immediately. You're not necessarily going to be balls deep in this contract, and you may not even read the contract. You may just want to get your video in and kind of deal with the specifics later.
Or if you're me, you actually read it.
But it's also not like there's any sort of negotiation or reach out. Like, you can't contact them and be like, hey, I don't like this. Then they just won't accept your video.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't even get the casting instructions or the video instructions until you sign this agreement. So you don't even know what you can submit until you've signed this agreement.
So the reason that the contestant gets the agreement before even the instructions are given is to put the contestant on notice of what is going to be required of them and give them instructions a little bit on how the process is going to be. So if you try to claim later down the road that you weren't made aware of certain aspects of the show or certain obligations on your end, the producers can point to this contract to say that no, you were put on notice even before you applied.
And they told you to read it.
And we're telling you to read it.
Read your damn contract.
In one of our previous podcasts, we talked about the essential elements of a contract being offer, acceptance, and consideration. Consideration being exchange for a benefit. In this case, it's just the opportunity to be considered to be a participant on the television show.
And they say further that the signer's sole consideration is only the possibility to be considered for this television program.
Essentially, you're giving up a lot of rights in order to be a participant on the show, which we're going to go into detail about.
So let's first get into some housekeeping. The parties to the contract listed are World of Wonder Productions and the participant that's agreeing to this. So it's our fictional season 15 queen. World of Wonder, also known as WOW, is a company that produces RuPaul's Drag Race, and they're doing it so that it can be aired on a Viacom channel. And we all know that the Viacom channel that is on now is VH1, but there's a lot of kind of corporate structure that goes on behind it. VH1 is owned by Viacom CBS. I did some sleuthing and I found out that Viacom CBS is now known as Paramount Global. There was a merger between CBS and Viacom. They split up about 2006, but then they remerged back in 2019 and they called it Viacom CBS.
So wait, CBS and Viacom are basically like Ben and J-Lo? Like they broke up and
They
got
broke
back
up.
together.
It was
They're
like
engaged again?
Bennifer, and then they broke up, and then now they're like Bennifer 2.0.
Okay.
And they just recently rebranded to Paramount Global. So this contract already is kind of a little bit outdated because it has an old corporation that they're talking about.
And that explains why you're getting All Stars on Paramount Plus, because they're all owned by the same parent company.
Exactly. So when we say we're contracting with Paramount Global, we mean the parent company and all of its subsidiaries. So that includes Paramount Pictures, which is the movie studio. It includes CBS Entertainment. It includes Paramount Media, which is like MTV, VH1, BET, Nickelodeon, Showtime, all those channels. And it also includes Paramount Streaming, which includes Paramount Plus and Pluto TV.
I didn't realize they own Nickelodeon. That explains a lot of the deals that Nina West got to participate in.
Nina West?
Yeah.
She does Nickelodeon stuff?
Yeah, wasn't she doing like kid shows on Nickelodeon?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Good for her. So it's likely that Paramount Global is using this contract as like a general template for all the ones that they have. They probably go around to all these production companies and say, all right, this is the contract that you need to use for any reality television programming. And then World of Wonder likely adds their own provisions on top of it. So some of it's going to be not completely relevant to what the Drag Race show is all about, but it's going to be about a reality television program with WoW specific provisions in it.
All right, so we're going to start with the very first phase of Drag Race production, which is finding the contestants. So if you were a season 15 applicant and your essays were selected to move on to the next round, you were provided with this participation agreement along with instructions for your video contestant application.
So this is really the first time that you're creating content for the show. This agreement outlines that your casting tape will be part of the content that you are creating, and they now officially own your casting tape as part of the agreement.
And we know this because the grants of right language and section 4 grants to producer and all of its licensees, designees, successors, and assigns perpetually, irrevocably, and for the exclusive use and enjoyment throughout the universe the following rights. First, all project materials are classified as a work for hire.
Well, what's a work for hire?
The project materials, including your audition tape, your artwork, costumes you design, characters you create, song lyrics that you write, are all created and provided for the show. So normally if you were to create, say, a character, costume, or song at home, you would own the copyright to that. You would be considered the author of that work. However, when you're creating it for the purpose of an employer, it's often considered a work for hire. So that means that anything you create for the employer becomes the author and the employer owns the copyright. And that's not necessarily the default. We're seeing that here because there's a specific clause in here that says the content you create is work for hire.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about this in our podcast, and I think one of the easiest examples is if you're like a Disney animator, you're sitting there and creating, graphics for Disney, but you don't own any of that, unfortunately. Under a work for hire provision, Disney's going to own any of the graphics that you create as a Disney animator. Yeah,
so that unconventional dress that's made in the first couple episodes of the show is owned by World of Wonder and is not your specific creation anymore.
Sorry, Metamorphosis. And it's not just your copyright that you're granting, it also includes any patents that you might be able to be applicable for or trademark rights.
This provision allows the producer to exploit and monetize anything that's created on the show. Pretty much all the iconic moments and catchphrases that are created on the show are owned by the show and not the queens individually. So I would think that if a queen wanted to create merchandise, if Lady Camden wanted to have a Maxine shirt,
Maxine!
She would need permission of World of Wonder to do that because they own the rights.
Absolutely. I want an NFT of Lady Camden falling down.
Yeah. I don't know what an NFT is, but I want one as well.
We'll do an episode on NFTs. How about that?
Although we're going to be talking about this contract in terms of timelines, these rights that are granted in terms of copyright, trademark, and other intellectual property are granted in perpetuity.
And what does in perpetuity mean?
That means that World of Wonder is able to monetize and exploit this IP forever.
And always.
There is no time limit. There is no expiration.
Infinity and beyond.
This means that World of Wonder can sell Willow Pill branded spaghetti long after she's dead. Well, long after any contestant is dead.
It's awful.
The contract also requires the contestant to grant or waive their moral rights to the work that they produce. Can you tell us what moral rights are?
No.
No?
Hold on.
It says it in the next line.
Moral rights basically allow a contestant or a creator of a work of art to object to any distortion or remaking of the original art form. The most kind of like recent case that I remember is the bull in Wall Street. There, it's like the famous iconic bronze bull. Somebody put like a statue of a little girl in front of it, like defiantly standing. And they were arguing that it changed the moral rights of the bull because it changed the character of like what was being presented in the art.
Basically, what you're saying is that it changed the message of what the bull represented.
Yeah.
So the reason why the show wants these rights removed from the contestants is that it would fuck with their editing. You want to be able to take hours and hours of footage and boil it down, creating a narrative that may or may not exactly be the truth of what happened on set. You want the producer to be able to take the original message and transform it into a way that's dramatic and fictionalized for the show.
Many thanks to Miss Fifi O'Hara and newly crowned villain of the season, Miss Diabetti.
The contract goes even further to say that production can simply just make stuff up and fictionalize things.
Oh, we both talked about this. Okay. So Section 4D states that the producer is granted the right to depict or portray the contestant's likeness and or life story either accurately or with such liberties and modifications as producer determines necessary in its sole discretion for the purposes of fictionalization, dramatization, or any other purposes, including without limitation to achieve a humorous or satirical effect, and by means of an actor who may or may not resemble them.
So that means when RuPaul sings "Blame It on the Edit," she's full of shit because the producers are given license to literally create and fictionalize storylines.
And make an edit. Yes, you did say it. You did say it. However, it is in the contract that they have the right to change the story.
For example, we were just at the taping of the season 14 finale, and before anything even started, we were all asked to film audience reaction.
So we did a lot of oohs, a lot of ahs, some slow claps, some really enthusiastic claps.
When they asked us to politely clap, we did this. When they asked us for standing ovation, we stood up and did a standing ovation. I'm not going to do that right now because I'm wearing sweatpants.
Thank you, RuPaul.
But it basically allows them to take that and place it anywhere they want. So say a certain contestant had the audience cheering for them, this allows them to change how the response is received, and you could put boos or a polite clap after a great performance to have the narrative that you want.
Yeah, I mean, Alaska and Willen just talked about this on Race Chaser about how, it's possible that you could take some funny comedy set and just change it with a little bit of laughter track and some boos instead. And then the kind of funniest thing might be really offensive or something else like that. So this gives them the right to make those modifications so that they can tell a story.
So the producers generally own all the content that is created or provided for the show, with one exception.
And this is with the music that each of the queens creates. So let's say our fictional season 15 queen is coming onto the set. It's a talent show, and she brings her own original music track to impress the judges. That fictional season 15 queen is going to be able to own her own music, but they're required to give a synchronization license in order for the show to use that in the television program.
Right. So, for example, Cornbread performed one of their own songs for the show. So they were required to give the show permission to use their original song, but it doesn't mean that the show owns their song anymore. However, World of Wonder owns the specific performance that occurred on the television program.
But they do still get the rights to your audition tape as soon as you submit it.
Yeah, so even if you don't get on the show, if you submit an audition tape, it's now property of World of Wonder. Sorry about it.
Okay, so our fictional season 15 queen has been selected to participate on the next season of RuPaul's Drag Race. She still has some obligations to fulfill even before she gets on the show.
So we're going to talk about the pre-production phase, which is going to detail after the participant has been selected up until the time that they're filming.
Section 3A states that any time during the participation of the project, producer may conduct an investigation of my medical and or psychological status, criminal history, if any, and or my personal and professional background.
This section prohibits the producer from using the results of either of these tests for the purposes of the show, but I would be a little bit wary because the section also eliminates any patient-physician privacy privilege.
By signing the contract, the participant agrees to compete if they're selected.
However, even though the contract requires you to compete in extenuating circumstances, I'm sure the show will push your application to the next season, like Tamisha Amon stated when she couldn't compete because she found out she had cancer.
Section 2 outlines the obligations for the participant if they're selected for the program. They need to appear on or off camera and must appear at any locations that the production staff says within a 3 days notice, and it could be marked down to at least 1 day notice.
So pretty much up until episode 1 films, if production wants you to be somewhere, they only really have to give you a day's notice to show up and tape.
Section 2C further specifies that production is granted access to the location of where I will be present in the course of my life, including, without limitation, their place of residence or place of business, and you grant producer the right to enter and occupy those locations and place cameras, temporary structures, and other recording devices therein for the purpose of capturing portions of the material. So this is kind of just looking at what is your life before Drag Race, what does your drag closet look like, that type of thing.
So there is zero expectation of privacy that begins within the pre-production phase and continues on pretty much throughout all aspects of filming. And keep in mind the confidentiality provisions have already kicked in once you sign the contract. So if you need to make accommodations to travel, to work with a designer, to order wigs, order makeup, you're allowed to say that you're doing it for a television show, but you're not allowed to give any specifics.
Nope.
Are you even allowed to say a show? You could say a show, right?
I think you could say I need something custom made for a particular television program that I will be a part of.
But it's also stated further in the contract that you're not allowed to make any deals for sponsorships. So you can't reach out to a designer and say, hey, can you design something for me for free? I'll be sure to say your name when I'm on the show. That is explicitly prohibited.
Now we're moving into the next phase. Our season 15 queen is finally arrived on set to film RuPaul's Drag Race. She's about to make her entrance in the workroom with some witty catch line as she's coming in. What can she expect as she's about to be filming? Sections 2AC and 2AD of the agreement state that you acknowledge and agree that during the participation in the project, you will have no expectation of privacy and that any and all of your actions may be recorded, including by hidden cameras and listening devices as used by producers. Such devices may or may not be visible to them, and the existence and locations of the devices may or may not be disclosed by the producers or any other person. So as an example of not knowing where these cameras or microphones are hidden, there's been a couple of times on Drag Race where there's people hiding behind the mirror. All Stars 2, we were so shook to find out that the eliminated queens were actually behind the mirror when Fifi O'Hara was talking shit the whole time.
Yeah, and you just need to be aware that even if you go and use the restroom and you have a hot mic on, that anything that happens in the restroom, whether it's be noises or sounds you make or private conversations that you're trying to have, can be recorded and will be used for the show if they want.
Absolutely.
Section 2D further states, you grant the right to videotape, film, portray, photograph, and otherwise record me, my actions, and my voice and other sound effects on and up to a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days a week basis in the course of my actual life, whether by requesting me to wear a microphone. So why does World of Wonder need to be so invasive?
This is one of the provisions that I thought was kind of more broad and not specifically applicable to RuPaul's Drag Race. This might be kind of like Love Island or something like that, or Big Brother, where it's like you're being monitored 24 hours a day. It might not be so applicable to Drag Race because there are specific taping times that they're on.
So in the earlier seasons of Drag Race, we used to get footage of the queens getting ready in their hotel rooms, whether it's just doing their hair or brushing their teeth. But the current season formats don't include that content. However, production is still able to leave cameras and microphones, whether they're disclosed or not, in the hotel rooms of the contestants. Maybe after what happened with Vivaldi sneaking in a phone, the producers would be more inclined to monitor the contestants in their hotel room when they're not taping.
Vivaldi, Drag Race Holland, season 2.
Yeah, you fucked it up for everyone.
Way to cheat.
And still make it to the top.
Part of the reason that they're so invasive is that because they need to get as much content for the show and make sure that they're portraying the person's likeness, this queen's character, on the show. So what is a queen's likeness? Section 2D says that a queen's likeness includes their name, physical features, voice, actions, personality, and any other personal identification. They also need to film candid responses to anything that happens while you're on set. But that doesn't mean that our queen can just go gallivanting around and having her merry way. If a producer didn't get the right camera angle, or maybe the mic didn't pick up something that they said, they might be asked to reenact or recreate or redo certain parts of their activities so that they can get it on camera.
So basically the producers won't force you to reinvent the wheel, but they may have you recreate it.
Ain't gotta reinvent the wheel. So our queen gave up her right to privacy, her likeness, to portray her as a character, and they made her reenact things. Not so bad. At least they're portraying her as she actually is, right? Well, not exactly. When our queen granted the producers right to their likeness, they also allowed the production to depict her however they wanted.
Think of all the times that a guest judge is announced and you have no idea who the fuck they are. You got to imagine that the contestants, some of them don't know either. So imagine take one is you announce the guest judge and you're like,
Who?
Production will obviously want to step in and be like, hey, we need to recreate this scene and you need to be excited about this guest judge. Even though your genuine, authentic response is, who the fuck is this? You're going to be screaming and being like, oh my God, I can't wait to meet her.
All right, so our queen has given up her right to privacy. They have given up their right to her likeness and to be portrayed as a character, and they make her reenact things. That's not so bad, right? At least they're portraying her as she actually is. Well, that's not exactly the case. When our queen grants the right to her likeness, they agree that the producers can change that likeness into any fictionalized narrative that they might want to. She acknowledges that the producer may depict or portray their likeness of the queen's life story accurately or with such liberties and modifications as the producer determines necessary in their sole discretion for the purpose of fictionalization, dramatization, or any other purpose, including without limitation, to achieve a humorous or satirical effect and by actors who may or may not resemble that queen.
Again, this allows the producers to take the raw footage they shoot and to put together an edit that creates a narrative for the show. In addition to giving up any expectation of privacy, the queens are also required to follow a set of rules which are provided as an exhibit at the end of the contract.
These include things like no drug use, no excessive alcohol use, no physical violence. They can have their bags searched or even x-rayed. There can be no cheating or attempting to rig the competition, such as like throwing a competition or throwing a challenge. And they agree to be sequestered whenever production says.
And this is a bit vague. What does no drugs mean? In California, cannabis is legal, but federally, cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance. So the producers could decide to enforce and penalize a contestant for cannabis use.
Yeah, it says explicitly in the rules that they can enforce the rules however they like. And if they enforce the rules against one person, they don't have to enforce it against the other, or vice versa. Maybe they let something slip for one contestant, then they enforce the rules for the other contestant.
Which allows the producers to favor one contestant over another if they want.
And it also says that they can change the rules at any time.
Even though the rules specifically state that physical violence is not allowed, the contract does require the participant to acknowledge that physical violence is a possibility. Section 2D states that another contestant, by virtue of the project or for other reasons, may act unpredictably, including without limitation, exhibiting physical or verbal aggression. Furthermore, participant expressly assumes the risk of any physical or emotional injuries they may suffer as a result of participation in the project. So when RuPaul makes you cry, you can't sue for emotional distress.
As our queen progresses through the challenges, she's going to create some intellectual property. She's going to create lyrics for a music challenge. Maybe she's creating some dialogue for an acting challenge. Or maybe she's creating a look for a ball challenge. Each of these can be protected as copyright on their own, and by default, the queen would be the owner of that intellectual property. But sorry to say, any intellectual property that's created under this agreement and during the show is now property of World of Wonder Productions.
And you assume that would be the case for content while provided, such as the script. But if the queen were to ad-lib and throw in a joke that takes off, that joke would still be owned by World of Wonder.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about like a commercial challenge. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, Katya's Red Scare, or heroin. Or these soup cans that they had to do in like All Stars 3.
So it seems the queens are making a lot of sacrifices to be on the show. So how exactly are the queens being compensated?
They're going to get $500 for each episode that they appear in. So potentially only making about $1,000 if you're one of the first queens to get kicked off. But you can make as much as $7,000 if you get through the whole season.
And if the trend continues where most of the queens don't get eliminated for the first 2 episodes, then the queens are making a higher minimum.
They don't get all this money at once, though. The contract states that you get 50% of your allotted amount as soon as the last episode is filmed, and then you get the remaining 50% after the last episode has been aired. So as we're talking, our season 14 queens have gotten half of it, and as soon as the last episode is aired, they're going to get their other half of their pay.
So production wraps on the season, and now we're going to discuss what happens in the interim while the queens wait for episode 1 to be released.
Yeah, so if you're a season 15 queen under this contract, you've already done filming, you've probably had some ups and downs in competition, but you're proud of what you did. So let's go tell everyone about it, yes? No. As you can probably expect, your confidentiality provisions are still in play, so you still can't say anything about the project to anyone during this time. As you can expect, under 12A of the agreement, the confidentiality section, you're not allowed to speak to anyone about what happened during the time of filming. No names, no contestant names, no storylines, no outcomes, nothing like that. You got to keep it shut.
Zip. However, even though the episodes have wrapped, the queens are not done with their filming obligations. Most likely, the queens will be asked to return around October or November to film the Meet the Queen segment, to film any teaser trailers, and to do any other additional promotion that World of Wonder deems necessary.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the What to Pack In videos, the Meet the Queens videos, those types of things.
And this is all covered in Section 2F of the agreement.
She has to be ready at a moment's notice, but fortunately, under Section 2H of the agreement, she's going to get a round-trip coach flight to the location. She's going to get a standard hotel room and a $75 per diem to be there.
However, if the filming location is less than 50 miles from where you reside, meaning if you're a queen that lives in LA, most likely, you're on your own to get there.
Sorry about it. So the next phase of production is when the cast is finally announced. So our season 15 queen is going to be announced to the world and maybe even start making public appearances. Again, this confidentiality provision is going to come into play. When the cast is finally announced, the queen can make reference incidentally to their appearance on the show, but can't give away anything about the project. How this normally works is as information comes out, then the queens can start talking about it. As soon as information becomes available to the public, it's no longer subject to that confidentiality clause.
For example, during the season 14 taping, RuPaul revealed to the finalists that the grand prize would be raised to $150,000. Now, the finalists would not be able to disclose that until the episode aired. However, World of Wonder wanted to publicize this, so they made the knowledge public before the episode aired, which would allow the contestants to then be able to comment and speak about it.
As part of the contract as well, the queens agree that they have to participate in other promotional activities. So if there's interviews with Entertainment Weekly, or if they want to make bubbly commercials or anything like that, you agree to be a part of that as well. Now, social media posts are a big deal under this contract. If you want to post anything on social media, it needs to be approved before you post that by the World of Wonder production staff.
Yeah, I would think most likely they would just get rid of this approval process and give the contestants a list of scheduled media posts. For example, if you're Lady Camden on like episode 2, this is the post that you'll be making for the week. And then if you wanted to do anything in addition to that, it would need to be approved by World of Wonder.
Yeah, I mean, as a good example of that, as soon as the finale, or as soon as the semifinals were announced, the next day you saw all these posts from the final queens that were like, hashtag team this, hashtag team that. So it's like, there's a production or a social media production schedule and you're obligated to post, as they say. This prior approval applies to not only social media, but any merchandise the queens would like to make or any music videos that they'd like to produce. Everything needs to go through World of Wonder and be approved beforehand.
So, for example, if you're a contestant that created a music video based off of something that happened in a certain episode, you may want to release it when that episode is aired, but it's really up to World of Wonder when they want that episode aired. They may want it aired when the reference happens, or they may want it aired when you win, or they may want it aired when you're eliminated. You really have no control over what gets released on social media.
I think a good example of that is Denali when she had a lip sync and then she did this whole Chicago drag video. Huh? Chicago Drag Excellence video with it. And it was released, I think, like the next day after the episode aired. So likely she had to go and get that approved through World of Wonder.
And a lot of times it's in the best interest of World of Wonder to release things as they air because it's publicity both for the queen and for their franchise. So these provisions last until the final episode airs. And then once the episode airs, we move into the exclusivity period, which lasts for an entire year from the date of the finale's broadcast.
So if it's May 15th, 2022, it's going to be May 15th, 2023.
Section 2G specifically defines what the exclusivity period means. I hereby grant to producer and agree that my appearance and participation hereunder will be exclusive to producer, 1, and all media and conventions excluding live performances, as defined below, from the effective date of this agreement until 12 months after the initial broadcast of the last episode of the program in which I appear. And 2, I shall be excluded from participating in any programming of any kind, including without limitation all television, internet, and streaming media for Out TV for a period of 7 years from the effective date of this agreement.
This means that for 1 year after the broadcast of the final episode, the participant can only create content for World of Wonder unless they receive written permission to create content somewhere else.
Well, that provision only lasts for a year after the finale. There's a specific provision against Out TV, a WoW competitor, that prohibits the contestant for producing content for them for up to 7 years, starting from the effective date of the contract.
Section 2G allows the participant to appear in live performances and personal appearances. However, participants shall be restricted from participating in any live performance engagement that fulfills at least one of the following conditions. It could either be intended to perform more than 2 times in a 12-month period, regardless of whether such days are consecutive or in the aggregate, or 2, it's intended to be performed in more than one location, like a tour.
And while we're talking about this in the exclusivity period, these provisions about live performances really begin the moment that episode 1 airs. It's important to note that the participant is prohibited from filming and creating content with any past, present, or future contestants on the show until the finale airs. And this is why we don't see current queens on the pit stop or on the podcast with, say, like Alaska and Willem.
The contestant is only to tour with a RuPaul's Drag Race branded touring group, and if they do, they'll receive $1,000 per show.
During the exclusivity period, Section 2H also requires the contestant to appear in any promotional content for the show free at charge. This means talk shows, podcasts, award shows. So when Simone and Gottmik showed up to the Grammys, World of Wonder didn't have to pay them for that.
They might have, but they didn't have to. Section 2J requires all the queens to participate in all drag cons. So I thought this was a little bit vague because it says all drag cons. If there is now a DragCon Atlanta or DragCon Chicago, that's going to be included because it's a bit vague. It doesn't specify DragCon LA or DragCon New York or DragCon UK or anything like that. But if they do get invited, they'll get $1,000 for a US appearance and they'll get $3,000 for an international DragCon appearance.
We note that the contract is silent about travel accommodations, which means that the $3,000 may need to cover your plane ticket and hotel to DragCon UK. Section 2K allows WoW to appoint Voss as the exclusive manager for the girls. However, if the girls want to work with a different manager, they may do so with written approval.
And lastly, each contestant is required to show up for the season 15 finale and reunion tapings. And it also includes an ask that they come to the season 16 filmings as well. We think this is because if you happen to be the winner or the winner of Miss Congeniality, so you'll be needing to give up your crown to the subsequent queen.
So the exclusivity period lasts for an entire year, starting with the broadcast of the season 15 finale.
But after that, you still have some obligations and some rights that World of Wonder has to any subsequent productions that you might do. This is covered in Section 8, Other Projects of the Agreement.
For 2 years after the expiration of the exclusivity period, for the season 15 girls, this would be April 2024 until April 2026, or even May if the season's extended longer. The girls are required to give the producer notification of any project that they intend to work on.
Participant shall give producer written notice of the intention to participate in any content creation and will negotiate exclusively with producer in good faith for 30 days with respect to the terms and conditions for each project.
This basically gives the producer the right of first refusal for all project the girls want to engage in for 2 years after the exclusivity period ends. Can you explain to us what is a right of first refusal?
A right of first refusal is allowing somebody to have the opportunity to be involved first. It's basically like you're first in line to do it. So this is like, as a good example, Alyssa Edwards might want to do a series with Netflix. If she's a subject to this provision after the exclusivity period, she's going to have to go to World of Wonder first and say, would you like to produce this and under what terms? If they refuse, then Alyssa can go to talk to another production company and get it done. But she is obligated to ask World of Wonder first.
And if Netflix approached Alyssa Edwards to do a show, Alyssa would have to bring those terms to WoW, and WoW would be given the option to match those terms and have priority over production.
They basically want the opportunity to be involved in the girls' careers as they progress. So what happens after this contract is done? We've gotten through the exclusivity period. We've talked about other projects that you might have to do. What about infinity and beyond after everything has been done? There's a phrase that comes about in a lot of these provisions, and Bussy Queen mentioned it, is in perpetuity and in all mediums throughout the universe. This is kind of a funny phrase, and people pick up on it thinking like, oh, it's going to be like interstellar galactic travel. Maybe. Honestly. So one of the reasons that we put in perpetuity is because we want the rights for as long as we can have those rights. It's not that unthinkable that in maybe even, 20, 30, 40 years, we might have a territory that is not within the globe. So sometimes when we do licensing provisions, you have the rights to the copyright in the United States or in Canada or in Europe or whatever it is. But we now have commercial spaceflight starting to become available. Do you have those rights as you travel to outer space? Can you watch Drag Race on the trip to the moon? That's why we're concerned with Into the Universe.
Yeah, and we have Drag Race UK versus the moon.
And the other one that we see a lot is in all forms of media. And this is, again, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next 20, 30, 40 years. Just in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we've gone from 8-tracks to cassette tapes to CDs to DVDs, and now everything's digital. So instead of enumerating all these things that we don't know are going to happen in the future, we just put in all mediums known or unknown.
So it's basically a catch-all.
It's a catch-all.
Some of the queens seem to have a misunderstanding that the NDA has an expiration period. That at some point the contract will end and they'll be able to talk about what happens on the show. This isn't true. The NDA lasts in perpetuity. You could disclose things as they become publicly available on the show, but you're really not supposed to talk about how the show is made. When the girls give us little tidbits, we all enjoy hearing it, but they're technically in violation of their contract. We specifically seen this with Tamisha Iman, who publicly stated that they wanted to talk about the show once their contract ended without realizing that their contract, at least this specific provision, never ends.
Speaking of in perpetuity, World of Wonder is and has the right to create merchandise based on your likeness for as long as they want.
And this concludes all of the obligations of the contestant during one cycle of a Drag Race contract. Next, we're going to talk about options and renewals, or as you may know them, all-star seasons. So once you apply, the producer has the irrevocable option to make you appear in the initial cycle of the show. That would be season 15 in this case. Dextra, can you tell us what an irrevocable option is?
Yeah, it just basically means that it can't be taken away. There's no way that you can assign this right to somebody else, maybe another production company. You can't give it to another company and say, this is my right that I have. They will always have the right to exercise this option.
In addition to the irrevocable option to appear on season 15, the contract also grants 5 additional irrevocable options, which require the girls to appear in other cycles of the Drag Race franchise, which could be an all-star season, it could be a UK versus the world season, it could be a superstar season, or it could be a version of the show that we don't even know about that hasn't been created yet.
And the producer can call them back at any time within 4 years after the last episode of which they appeared on. So if you're a season 15 girl, you'll be on Drag Race in May of 2023. And for 4 years after that, they can call you back for an all-star season.
And each time you're called back, that resets the clock based on the last finale that you appeared in. So for example, Jujubee was on All Stars 5, which may or may not have the same contract provisions as this, but assuming that it does, once All Stars 5 ends, RuPaul can call her back for 4 years at any time to come back in another season, which they did, UK versus the World.
UK versus the World.
Now that UK versus the World has ended, it's another 4 years from the airing of that season.
Do you think that includes Queen of the Universe?
Well, the language specifically says 5 other cycles of this series or all-stars, and I think that's broad enough to really include anything that they want you to appear in.
Any production.
And if you're called back, you only receive a 25% increase on your episode payment. So the girls are currently making $500 per episode in season 15. If they were to be called back on a second cycle, it would be $525, and that would increase 25% for each season you're called back. How much is that, Jake?
I don't do math.
Off the top of your head.
I literally don't do math.
I don't do math anymore either.
Do you say math or math?
Yes.
Ah!
I don't do either. So the life of this contract may span for over 20 years, depending on how many seasons of All Stars you're asked to come back on. But let's talk about ways that you can get out of your contract, which is predominantly involuntary.
What about removal? Let's say you're a Willem or you're somebody else who broke the rules. What happens if you're removed from the show, and what happens to your contract then?
Even though you're selected to be on a show, production isn't required to keep you, and they aren't required to use any footage. We've seen this with Sherry Pie, basically filmed her entire season, and then production removed her
after the season started airing.
Yeah, and was edited out. Production is not required to keep you in the show.
And she would be required to give back all of the prizes that she won and any money that she won.
Right. That also applies if you withdraw from the show. You're able to leave the show at any time, but if you leave the show, you forfeit any payment that you received, and you may be in danger of giving back any prizes. 2 lifelong considerations that may get you terminated from your contract include breach of your NDA and the morality clause. The morality clause basically says that if you do or say anything that sheds a negative light on yourself, on World of Wonder, or any of their affiliate or parent organizations, your contract can be terminated. You'll stop receiving payments, you may be in danger of giving your prizes back, and you certainly won't be asked to be on a future cycle.
And there's even a liquidated damages provision if you break your confidentiality. A liquidated damages provision is basically like a pre-negotiation of what you're going to pay if this is broken. In this case, it's a $2 million liquidated damages provision if you break this confidentiality agreement. So this is our entertainment law news segment where we talk about a little bit of what's happening in entertainment law out in the real world. I noticed a few of my email alerts were talking about this new Andy Warhol case that's going to the Supreme Court. Have you heard about it?
No, who's Andy Warhol?
Oh my God, shut up. For real?
No.
Okay, I'm like, we literally went to an Andy Warhol exhibit.
I remember. Yeah. I may have been on mushrooms, but I remember.
We literally went to an Andy Warhol exhibit together. Okay, so this case is about fair use, again, and whether something is sufficiently transformative in order to be not subject to copyright protection. Yeah. So apparently, there was this artist who took a picture of Prince back in the day. Andy Warhol took that photo, kind of did his Andy Warhol thing on top of it, and started selling it and making merch, blah, 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 doing all the things. So then the photographer came back and said, we're going to sue you because this was obviously a copy of the work that I had done. And they, battled it out in district court. They went to appeal in the Second Circuit, which is like on the East Coast, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the Second Circuit, probably New York, somewhere like that. They held that a work cannot serve as a transformative purpose and character for fair use purposes without something more than the imposition of another artist's style on the primary work, such that the secondary work remains both recognizably deriving from and retaining the essential elements of its source material. So basically, the Second Circuit is saying, like, you can't just take somebody's work, slap your own artistic shit on it, and then all of a sudden it's new and transformative and yours. There was 2 conflicting decisions from the federal district and the circuit, and now because there's not any agreement on what it is, it's finally going to the Supreme Court. We haven't had fair use in the Supreme Court for a little while if we don't count that Oracle, case about like copyright and like code and fair use and that type of thing. So this is actually going to be a pretty big judgment once it actually comes out.
So if I'm understanding correctly, somebody owns a copyright to a photo that they've taken of Prince. Then Andy Warhol came and took that photograph, which he does not have copyright to, and he basically put his like little Andy Warhol filter on it.
Mm-hmm.
photographer is trying to claim that he is in copyright violation by basically reproducing his photograph, even though, let's just say, it has a filter on it, right? So the court case is trying to determine whether the filter is different enough.
If it's transformative enough, because one of the elements of fair use is to decide whether or not it is sufficiently transformed enough to be a new piece of work rather than something that is a copy of something else. This is particularly interesting to me because I do my own kind of thing where I take photographs of, LGBT couples or gay people from the past and put my own kind of spin and filter on it. That's some of these kind of like pieces that I have back here. It's kind of the same thing. I want to know if like what I am doing is sufficiently transformative or if it's kind of just ripping off somebody else's stuff.
I love following gay artists on Instagram that do like illustrative work, and that illustrative work is usually based off of a photo. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're taking a photo and just literally recreating it as a drawing. Sometimes they're scanning the photo in and using different production tools to create their own spin on the photo. Mm-hmm. And I'm of the camp that if you're doing that, it's sufficient enough to not just be derivative for it to be transformative.
If you're doing anything to it at all.
If you're just doing minor changes, I don't think that's enough. I think you have to have some sort of artistic spin, and that artistic spin is, I would intentionally leave that broad for it to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
I think a good line is to say, if you're making alterations to the image in order to enhance it or to make it more clear or, take out some fuzziness of it or whatever, that's probably not sufficiently creative to be transformative or transformative enough. But if you're doing it with some artistic bend to it, if you're adding things to it, then we're starting to get into the line of what is transformative. But again, you can't just throw one filter on it. It has to be some kind of like artistic expression behind it.
I think if you want to be more cautious, you obviously just don't create the work. And again, I'm taking this out of the realm of photos, but like specifically on Drag Race, the girls aren't allowed to do copyrightable characters on the show, even though it's their drag interpretation of that. And I think that would be the same thing as Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol puts his Andy Warhol spin on it, whereas Bob the Drag Queen would put their Bob the Drag Queen spin on a particular character.
So when Andy Warhol created this, he said it's intended to strip Prince of his humanity and instead display him as a popular icon. So he's taking this Prince photo and saying, hey, this is pop culture. I'm identifying him as a pop icon and separating him who he is as his own persona.
Yeah, I mean, and that brings up another element of fair use, which I don't think you did cover, is the ability to take work to do commentary. If you're creating a social comment on a picture by transforming it with your own artistic expression, I think that's sufficient to take it out.
Yeah, that may be another good argument for them to make. I love talking about it. Let's get back to our content.
Sounds great.
We've made it through the journey of our season 15 queen and the contractual obligations that she has after she signed this agreement. If you have any questions about it, definitely write us in. We can answer questions for you. Can't give you legal advice, but we're happy to explain what's in the contract and help you navigate through it. Let us know what you think or what you'd like to hear. Write us in at readingisfundamentalpodcast@gmail.com.
And make sure to follow your favorite gay attorneys on all social medias, at Blue Bailey SF on Instagram, at Darkly Dreaming Dextra on Instagram. I'm not promoting Twitter because I get shadow banned. Like literally, I could post a picture of the microphone and it will be like, wow, this content is flagged for sensitive content.
Check out the Reading is Fundamental podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
And listen to us on Apple iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere that podcast can be listened to.
And remember, read your damn contracts.
Because reading is what?
Necessary to understanding the terms, conditions, and expectations of your entertainment contracts. Look at this. The glue is like top to bottom. You see that?
Yeah. All I heard was bottom. Ooh, it's not the honey part.
You didn't mix it?
I did, but it's like, I've been sitting here for so long that I'm going to teabag myself.
Wow. If you get that on my hair.
I just gotta suck on them like this.
Ew. Ew.
Some of the juice just...
What are you doing?
I'm getting teabagged. Mind your business. That's it. That's good.
Okay. Bye.